We live yet?
Yep, we should be live.
Yes, I think so.
There we go. Hi everyone. Welcome to Quick Connect Live. So in these sessions, we talk about specific topics. In last round, we started talking about boundaries and things like that. So this round, we have Ethan, who is going to take us through his pet topic on responsibility. So we've spoken on this topic several times, right? So it's not like the responsibility talent team that we're familiar with. So this ties back to things like personal responsibility, whether you have a victim kind of mentality, right? By surrendering that responsibility to other people, as well as his pet topic on office politics and things like that.
Yep.
So I'm going to turn the time over to Ethan to maybe like set the ground for all of us so that we're all on the same page, right? So Ethan?
Yep. Hey guys. I'm just surprised that Jeffrey is not here. Like usually he's here.
Let me go. Let me go bust.
Yes. We all miss him, right?
Yeah, I miss having him here, man. Anyway, so responsibility as a concept, I think, is quite interesting for everybody to talk about because it spans across a lot of areas. But I think I want to start with a conversation when we start talking about our personal definitions of responsibility. So I have a very technical definition. So I'll be honest with you here that I want to be the last to talk about it. But however, if everybody can share a little bit more about what they understand of responsibility, whether is it the strengths finder way of looking at responsibility, or even your personal responsibility of how you look at how you deal with your personal responsibilities. And let's talk about that as what do you describe as responsibility for yourself? Can I start with Alex?
Yeah. So I think let me touch on two angles, right? So the first one is responsibility as a Clifton Strengths talent team. So people with the responsibility talent team are people who take personal psychological ownership for things, right? So this is when their words, they are born, when they promise something, they'll do it. If they can't deliver it, they feel really bad. They are also the people that I would like to say, when something needs to be done and they see no one doing it, they have this urge to go and get it done. So people with the responsibility talent team have some of these characteristics. And if you want to find out more about it, you can explore Gallup's website. But I think what we'd like to talk a little bit more today is about things like the mindset and the personal responsibility, right? About taking responsibility for your own life, your own emotions, things that are going on, your own thoughts even, right? So sometimes we have unconscious thoughts or subconscious thoughts, right? Do we take responsibility for these things? Do we take responsibilities for the situations in our life? So a lot of times, events happen to us, but then we can take responsibility for our response to those situations that happen to us. A lot of times people go like, oh, it's not my fault, that person did this, that person did that, without realizing that we have a personal responsibility over how we choose to respond. So a lot of times we choose to react instead of respond. And I think in that sense, that degree of responsibility, we have surrendered, right? We have not taken personal responsibility. And the other way that I like Stephen R. Covey used to describe responsibility, right? He said responsibility is responsibility, the ability to respond, right, to a situation or something. So I kind of like Stephen R. Covey's definition of responsibility that, in the midst of whatever is happening to us, do we have the ability to pause, to think, and to respond appropriately to the situation. So that's, for me, responsibility or personal responsibility. Oh, and one more thing to add. So if you read Jack Canfield's book, Success Principles, I think the very first success principle is taking personal responsibility. So for those of us who have not read that book, the Success Principles, that first thing, that first principle I thought was very useful in terms of setting our mindsets.
Very cool. And so thank you, Alex, for sharing this. I think it's very interesting because I realized no wonder I got all these ideas because I read all these books and I didn't realize I had all this also in place. But I want to extend it into like daily practices today as well, as to how we can talk about it on a practical level, because a lot of these concepts are very far flung from reality, right, for a lot of us. And so how do we do it on a daily level? But let's go on with Eileen. Could you share a bit more about your thoughts on what responsibility means?
I really must admit that I didn't really think too hard about it.
That's okay.
It is kind of like, it's something I feel like what Alex mentioned, right? If something needs to be done and nobody does it and you think you can do it, you just do it. You don't think too hard about it, especially if it's something that pretty much comes naturally for you. You don't think too hard. Unless you don't know how to do it, you know it needs to be done, then you got to go out and get additional support. That is when you really think whether should you or should you not do it. But otherwise, to me, it's not something I think very hard about. But I like what Alex said about responsibility equals to ability to respond. I like that. And also the part about you saying that you said something about the responsibility for your thoughts, your thoughts. And I thought that was quite interesting because you feel your responsibility to doing something is much easier than responsibility for your own thoughts about what and why certain things happen or what are the things that's happening. That you don't think so much, I think. At least for me, at least, yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, Eileen. What about Paylin? Tell me more about your thoughts on responsibility, especially after last week as well.
Last week? What happened last week?
Oh yeah, you were not here. Oh yeah.
2 weeks ago.
Oh,
2 weeks
okay,
ago.
2 weeks ago.
Ethan.
2 weeks ago. Sorry, 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I heard all of you offline actually.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So I think this is something I didn't really think about, but if I were to be very clinical, it's really at the workplace, it's really specific tasks within my job scope, which I need to do because these are entrusted to me. But I think that's a very simple definition. There is way more things that we think about when we think about the word responsibility. In fact, I think what Alex has shared is also this. A lot of times when we make choices in life, there are consequences. Whether or not we like the consequences or not, whether it's positive, negative, we have to sort of take responsibility and shoulder the consequences. So that's part of responsibility as well. So I think it's also a lot influenced by our values. Like, what do we value? So for example, in the workplace, if I value care and kindness, I sort of think that I should be the one showing that to people around me. And this is something that I take on, even though it's not something that my bosses ask me to do.
I hear what you're saying. So it's basically like where you take concern and care and how you extend it as well, right? Okay, very cool. Jenny, nice change of view. I love the view.
Yeah, the background looks awesome.
Yeah, I wish we had such a way of looking in the mornings without feeling like you're burning up.
We feel we need to fly there now.
Yeah.
I share an office with my husband, and he likes to get up early and do his paperwork before he goes into the restaurant, and he hates it when I'm talking. So I had to come outside, but it's a beautiful day, so it's all right.
That's great. All right, so I would love to hear your take on responsibility.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to join this morning was because I feel like sometimes my responsibility, and I'm thinking about it from a Strength Finders way, it sometimes stresses me out. It's like I'm overly responsible. If I come up with an idea, or if I feel like something needs to be happening, even if no one told me to, I feel kind of stressed out about it. And sometimes I want people to behave a certain way. And when they don't do it, sometimes I feel responsible for that. So it's kind of like what you guys said about, reacting versus responding. So that's kind of why I'm here. I'm trying to, sometimes I feel like I'm overly responsible. And so that's why I'm here.
I'm hearing you. I think a lot of us here have the savior complex. How many of you here have savior complex actually?
Hi.
What did you call it? What kind of
Savior
complex?
Savior complex.
Savior complex.
Yeah,
yes,
it's
got it.
Responsibility, right? It's all about extending
Yes.
beyond your scope and reaching out and taking care of other people, right? So that's savior complex, right? So yeah, I know that very well. Even though I actually kind of hate the concept of it after I grew up a bit older, but I still had the tendency to try to save everybody. Let me check. Nicholas, are you there? Thanks, Jenny. Nicholas, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I just came
great.
back from work. Yeah, I just managed to rush home. Yeah.
Okay, great. Would you like to share, or would you like to wait till
No,
later?
I have to be in a silent mode because have to excuse me. I'm also eating something.
Okay,
I hope you don't
great.
mind.
Take your time, take your time, take
Rush.
your time.
Yeah. Sorry.
No worries.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's great that we are talking about it on this level where actually, so I think, so I've classified responsibility on multiple grounds, but I also wanted to talk about respect today because I realized how much respect and responsibility are actually very relevant. So think about all the people that you respect in your life. Have they been responsible people? Have they been people who took responsibilities for and with others and taken things to a new level? Right? So it's very interesting, right? Because I realized that like a lot of people are very triggered if other people hashtag or quoted disrespect them, which is a very big question mark because I find it very interesting where some people get offended if you say no to them. They feel disrespected if you disagree with them. There are people who feel disrespected even just being in the same space as them. Right? So this is a very interesting concept. So why is it, okay, and we talk about this, right? If respect is relevant to a person who takes responsibility, and we use that as a benchmark, right? Because we respect people who can take responsibilities and we respect them because of their responsibility taking abilities, that they care for others, that they do certain things. We can respect them because of it. Here comes the other flip side. What does it mean to be disrespected? Right? So this is also another question, right? Like, what makes you feel disrespected? So I know for me, right? So I'm going to share a bit more about responsibility and respect a little bit more. I'm just going to paint a story about how I feel disrespected. So I didn't realize I felt disrespected as a concept for the longest time because I've always felt like so again, I'm all autism. My connection with my emotions has not been very strong for when I was my younger years. So I did not know what being offended felt like. So I always felt like I was being logical, but actually in the end, I was actually being defensive and being offended and being feeling disrespected. But what I really, really recognized was being disrespected for me felt like when somebody takes me for granted. That's the number one thing which I feel is an absolute disrespect, which means that the person's not taking responsibility for their part to play and throwing all the blame on me. That's what I mean by feeling taken for granted, right? So, for example, it's the person's responsibility to take care of their own meals, like lunch or something like that, and then they blame me because I took up their time, because I was having a chat with them and it extended beyond the time that they expected, and then they missed lunch and then they blamed me, which was strange because that also. Then we go back to 2 weeks ago, the topic boundaries, right? Did they clearly show the boundaries to be able to let me know that they were going for lunch? I did not know I was crossing the person's boundaries. So then comes the communication element, right? So respect is a very complex thing on its own, which is also why I related it back to responsibility, because a lot of us live our lives around the concept of respect. The people that we respect are our role models. When we are respected by other people, we feel valid and we feel like a good person, right? Respect is a very important social phenomenon that is very, very important for many of us.
So respect is kind of broad as well, right? So I think responsibility is probably one thing that leads us to respect a person, but there are a lot of other things, including things like values or character, that leads us to whether we respect a person or not. So
Tell me more.
How do I put it? I'm not sure if that's related responsibility, but so when you see a person behaving something that goes against your values, maybe because you value something and you think that person behaves in a certain way that you don't agree with, I'm not quite sure if that's related responsibility. I, at this point, don't think so, but it could just be, I disagree with this person. There's, we have different values, and therefore, because of certain positions that you take, I find it hard to respect this person. It might not be a responsibility issue, right?
So that's where I think it's really interesting. What does respect mean to you in this feeling?
Respect as in it's someone that I look up to.
Okay, so admiration, right?
Yeah, yes, some degree of that, yes.
So I think that's very interesting, right? So I think it's a very interesting concept that, because then we have the issue of respect having too many meanings in one context, right? Respect being admiration, respect also being a whole bunch of stuff. But what makes you feel respected? I think that's easier. Let's start with what makes you feel respected.
I think someone makes me feel respected when they have consideration for me, right? When they have, how do I put it? So let me give you an example, right?
Great.
So I have two mentees. At one point of time, they were moving into hostel in hall, right? So I've offered to help them shift their stuff to hall. And one of them, their parents said, hey, why do you want to bother Alex, right? I can send both of you to the hall. So he then offered my other mentee, and my other mentee called me and said, hey, Alex, look, so-and-so's dad has offered to send me to hall together with him. Is that okay with you? So he had that, I made an offer. He knows that offer stood. Before he accepted someone else's offer, he came back to me to ask, am I okay with it? To me, I felt that was very respectful because he had consideration. He bothered to check with me before he went along. I mean, I was totally fine, right? I was trying to offer them, help them with moving. So someone else offered to, totally fine with that. But the fact that he came back to me to check with me first, I thought was a very good sign of respect.
So it's a showcase of respect by showing you that, yes, I thought of you, I considered your offer, and look, here's another thing that happened, and I'm keeping you informed.
Yeah. So there's a communication, there's a consideration. I guess in some degree there's responsibility, right? In terms of there was a kind of an agreement that I'm going to do something, or we are going to do something together, and that agreement is going to change because the situation has changed, and he's checking with me first. So in that sense, I think responsibility does come in, right? In terms of the communication and things like that.
So he took responsibility, kind of in responsibility to communicate with you and to have a conversation with you, right?
Yep.
Rather than just leaving it hanging and then leaving it there. I think
or just assuming that it was okay, right? I mean, it was okay, but the fact that he didn't assume,
actually
demonstrated that respect for me.
That's very cool.
But he also respected your time. That if you didn't have to fetch them, you could do something else. Rather than you be waiting for them, and then suddenly on that day and at that moment you are told that, oh, we don't need your help anymore. So I think that's respecting your time.
So the way he communicated and told me that was definitely very, very respectful of the time. I think what added to it was also that he didn't just tell me, he asked me. He could have gone and like, hey, Alex, so-and-so is going to send me to camp. We don't need you to send us anymore. It's okay. So he didn't kind of make that decision and just told me, but he actually came to ask me. So there was accountability there.
That's really very cool. I just want to answer some of the comments on Facebook because Mok Ingren, one of my ex-classmates, Ingren, just talked about how feeling disrespected doesn't mean you're being truly disrespected, and feeling respected doesn't mean you'll be truly respected. So this is very interesting. The word respect is highly loaded, and which is also one of the reasons why I'm trying to reclaim it, to get us to have a thought about it, because I relate it to responsibility quite a lot, and I'm going to explain a bit later on as to the second half of this. But I'm loving the conversation right now. And I would love to go to, actually, Jenny, could I have your thoughts on what respect means to you?
So respect to me feels like that my thoughts, my opinions, my experience is valued. So it kind of goes back to, Alex, what you were saying about being asked instead of somebody assuming, being asked. So I'm a university instructor, and I also own a restaurant with my husband. And so I feel like at my restaurant, the employees respect me because I'm genuine with them, and I make thoughtful decisions. right? And so they can trust me. It gets to they respect me because they can trust me that I'm not gonna change my mind or make assumptions. I like this whole assumption thing.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. So communication is a very clear part of respect for you as well, right?
Very, very much so.
That's very cool. What about Palin?
I think mine is very similar to Jenny in the sense that I think I feel respected when people respect my viewpoints and opinions. So that means to me it would be things like when I'm speaking, the person doesn't interrupt me or cut me midway. That would make me feel respected if the person lets me continue until I finished. Having said that, I don't think I feel offended, but I just appreciate the fact that people let me finish my point. Yeah, and I also try not to interrupt others as well, of course, given that I don't quite like being interrupted. But sometimes I could get too enthusiastic, I might.
It's a slightly different thing when you're resonating and you're just saying, hey, let me just add this in, and then you can continue, right? But okay, let me just add something else in, because you said that you said that it's a pet topic of yours, respect. You said it on my Facebook.
Oh yes.
Tell me more. What do you mean by it's a pet topic of yours?
Because I train also in the topic of professional etiquette. So there's a lot of conversation about us as human beings wanting to be respected. We all want that, but it's not something that we can force out from other people. And what I would always like to tell my learners is that you have to earn it from other people based on the way that you treat them as another human being. So basically you value them as how you value yourself in terms of opinions, how you treat them, how you speak to them. So that's a key point. It's not something that we can force, but something that we have to earn and make the effort to earn that.
That's very cool. I think that's a very good point to talk about as well.
I just want to add something that
Sure.
Palin sparked in my head, right? That everyone wants to feel respected. So I think that's quite universal. But I also think that there are some people who feel disrespected very easily, right? This is probably because of their own esteem or their own opinions, something like that. So, respecting people and feeling respected are kind of on the flip side, but they're quite different because feeling respected has a lot of other things that feeds into it.
Yes.
It's like, I'm not disrespecting you, but I don't know why you feel disrespected. There's some people.
Let me explain this a bit more, right? So here's a very interesting thing. I did a study, a survey a while back. So I asked people, what do they do to show respect to other people and what makes them feel most respected? The answers were flip side in terms of the answers. So it's like telling the person they're good, so all this kind of stuff is what they will do for the person. But what makes them feel most respected is having the person say good things about them in front of other people. Right? So that right, but the ranking was number 1 for what makes them feel respected and number 5 for what people would do, right? So it's very interesting, right? It makes you really realize, wow, there's something really interesting going on here. So it was actually, that was a huge spark for me quite a while back to think that respect was full of crap, right? I will be frank, as a concept, respect seems so loaded and so complex. And I kind of came full circle over the last week. And it's only the last week that I really came back to the word respect again. And that's why I'm so excited to share with you guys. And its relevance to responsibility is really, really key here. And how it works, right? So I would love to hear Eileen's point of view as well about respect.
It's quite interesting when you said that our perception of respect, what we expect from what we want when we say people respect us versus what we do to gain respect of others, right? I kind of agree with what your findings is, because what we want to feel respected by others is a composition of so many things. People can do everything and then we can just lump it up by saying, they didn't respect me. Because one of the things I thought was like, Pei said, okay, allow me to finish my point without interruption, right? I thought another aspect of it could be even somebody asking me for my opinion when I didn't even say anything in the room, and they realize that I haven't said anything, but they respect my views. and they say, okay, what do you think? So I thought that, to me, I would say that is kind of a respect.
I think that's very interesting, right? It's very beautiful. So actually, if we look at it, respect is a very complex subject. So what I wanted to do was actually to simplify it into an abstract concept. And so one of the major things I realized is that once you actually remove context out of all these things, I want to talk about a universal thing. I think Nicholas is still eating, so I'm not going to ask you any questions. Am I right?
You just asked him a
The
question.
one more, I'll be back.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, almost, yes.
Cool.
Yeah, but don't. I'm sorry, I'm not a very good talker. I'm a good listener. Okay.
No, it's all good. No. We love to hear you talk, no matter how good or how bad you are. It's all welcome, right? So this is part of Quick Connect, right?
Ethan, I love how you said you're not going to ask him question and immediately proceeded to ask him one.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. I mean, big question. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to share. This is my pet topic, and I'm just sharing this because I want to go through a bit more of this, right? So I wanted to go through respect and responsibility as a relationship, and I think this is a great talking point. So I would actually say that a lot of times respect and responsibility is weaponized. It's used to guilt trip people to say certain things and get people to not take responsibility themselves. So if I tell you that you're not being responsible or you're disrespecting me, it might be me not taking responsibility for my behaviors, my thoughts, my actions, or whatever I'm experiencing. It's actually been weaponized. When we redirect respect as a concept to other people and redirect responsibility only to other people, it has been weaponized. It's a very scary word for that reason. If you look at a lot of people, right, they want to be respected. But when I ask people, do you want to take responsibility? The number of people who show terror when I talk about responsibility is a lot, right? The word responsibility is a weight. I mean, Jenny shared about it, she likes taking responsibility for things, but at the same time, it does drag her down. So if I were to add on more responsibilities onto her, what would happen?
But I think when it comes to volunteering to be responsible for something, a lot of factors come into play, right? So things like the suitability of that person, the person's current workload, and the overall general, how does the organization treat people with regards to people who are responsible for certain things. So, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, right? So like in Singapore politics, I don't think many people want to take responsibility for the public or transportation system because that's almost like exit seat as far as I've seen, right? Almost every minister who takes on the transport minister role exits, right? So it's like, oh, why would I want to take responsibility for that position or that role? So I don't know, that whole taking responsibility thing is also fairly loaded.
Yeah, and that's a struggle. Jenny, you had something to say?
Well, because I am responsible and people around me know that I'm responsible, sometimes they give me more responsibilities, even when they're not necessarily mine to take on, right? It's not necessarily my role. But because I'm quick to take responsibility and they know that once I commit to it, it'll happen. So sometimes maybe being responsible is not good.
So Jenny, I have a question, right? Especially for someone with responsibility. Do you find it very hard to not take a responsibility which is not yours?
Yeah, absolutely. All the time. Everything is my responsibility. I'm the big sister. I'm the boss. Everything is my responsibility.
So is it
if I'm around people who I can delegate to, and I have confidence that they will follow through on that delegation, then I love that. I love working with those kind of people because they take responsibility for doing their part.
Right.
Otherwise, I have to do it.
Yeah. So the responsibility that you do take on for yourself, do you take it like kind of, I love this responsibility, I want to take it, therefore I take it? Or do you take it like resentfully that, I have to take it because nobody wants it, or someone pushes it to me and I can't say no and I have to do it? So which one is it for you?
Both. It depends on the context.
Which one more, or how often?
Well, it really depends on the context. So when it comes to the restaurant, my husband's business, I feel like I have to do it sometimes. I don't actively work at the restaurant every day, but the financial performance of the restaurant directly impacts me. But and that's like one world, right? Like I have two worlds that I live in. And then my other world is school. And there I like to take on responsibility. I volunteer to take on responsibility.
Okay. So the difference is in the context.
Very much so. Yeah.
Interesting.
Question here, sorry. There's a bit of noise here, but do you take responsibility because you don't trust others to do the job as well as you would want to do it? And then, or the other way is you do take responsibility because other people don't want to do it because they know they can't do it to your expectation.
Eileen, that's a really good point. Often, and especially like when I feel resentful might be too strong of a word, but when I feel frustrated, it's because I don't feel like somebody else can do it. And the stakes are high in my mind. And so I can't blow it off. It's too important. Even though I'm not necessarily good at it. Like I help with the bookkeeping and the accounting stuff at the restaurant. And that's not my best subject, right? But I don't trust it just to be in the wind. But the other things like that I like to take responsibility for are things that I enjoy doing, like leading teams. I love to lead teams, so I like that responsibility.
I think it's great because I'm going to go a bit further into this, and the concept of boundaries will come nicely into the picture, right? Yep. Which is our pet topic from 2 weeks ago, right? So I really want to talk about this. And so the reason why I'm doing all of this, I realize, is because if we are taking all these frameworks and all these ideas without centralizing them along a simple concept, we're never going to understand how to utilize them properly. So I would like to anchor everything back down to responsibility because it's the easiest way of defining all these different aspects and talk about it on this level because I think it's really fun. And the other part is that it's then actionable because then the questions that come in mind become relevant to the context you're in. And like Jenny said, right, like there are specific things that I like taking responsibility for. But here comes the part. And there are a couple of things we created that I think will make you laugh. And I really want to go through this a bit more, right? So I want to go through the traditional definitions of respect. So this is taken off Cambridge, right? Admiration felt or shown for someone or something that you believe has the good ideas or qualities. Politeness, honor, and care shown towards somebody or something that is considered important. A feeling that something is right or important that you should not attempt to change it or harm it. Or a feeling you show when you accept that the different customs and cultures are different, so you do not be offended by other people. So this is very interesting, right? So why is it so many contextualized versions? So I actually took quite a bit of time to go and abstract it. And I just wanted to, so I talked about this just before the session I shared with Eileen and Alex. But basically it is, and they helped me out because they asked me a very important question that I realized English-wise it was a bit off. Taking responsibility to observe, accept, and manage boundaries with the other. So when I respect you, it means that I'm looking at your boundaries and trying to work with it rather than against it or trying to throw things into your boundaries. So when we go back to 2 weeks ago, benevolent boundary violators, which are the people who like to extend their responsibilities into other people's zones of responsibility. So think of this as a boundary, a circle as a boundary, and that boundary is whatever you're responsible for. Whenever we violate the boundaries, we're going into the places where they're responsible for. This is why spoiled kids are spoiled. Their boundaries are violated day by day. All their issues, everything that they want to do, anything that they want to attempt, somebody else will take the responsibility away from them. They have no boundaries in their life. They have no privacy in their life. This is a very interesting concept. So why I was trying to figure out why sport kids turn out the way they do. Anybody has anything to say?
I was just thinking, in some teams, right? We talk about taking responsibility, and also what Jenny said about, some things are too big. The consequences are too big, and we don't want it. So some leaders actually do this, right? They go like, "We are a team. This is all our responsibility. Everybody is responsible for this." How does that fit into this?
So that is actually an abdication of authority. So authority, okay, as my definition of authority goes, okay, and I'll define responsibility later, right? Is the responsibility to make decisions with and for other people. So usually when team leaders say that, they're trying to get everybody else to get buy-in on his decision so he doesn't take the consequences afterwards. Usually, that's what I see. At least that's the most ironic use of the teamwork pitch, right? We all decide on this together. So if anything goes wrong, it's not mine.
Okay, so the context of that was a little bit more of like, we're all a team. If there's a gap or there's a slack, someone else, comes in and plugs the gap, kind of thing, right? So if everybody was pulling their own weight, that kind of makes sense.
Yes.
But at the same time, it also gives opportunity for some people to not pull the weight, because then other people will plug in the gap.
Absolutely.
So kind of.
So that's exactly it, right? So it depends on the context and the scenarios. But very often when I hear people say that it's all a team effort, most people who pull their weight wouldn't say such statements that I know. At least contextually.
I've seen people who try to use that term to get everybody to pull their weight, because he thinks some people are not pulling their weight. So they go like, everyone, we are a team, everyone needs to contribute,
Then you're not being specific and you're not working, because who will feel guilty? The people who are actually pulling their weight. Who are the people who won't feel guilty for this? The people who don't pull their weight.
So I guess
the people,
Jenny,
people who are pulling and I interrupted. I'm sorry. I'm not.
It's all good.
I disrespected.
It's all good. Let's go.
I got so excited. The people who were already pulling their weight felt responsible for doing more. So the people who weren't pulling their weight just, are slacking off even more. Oh, that makes me crazy. That's a terrible way to manage.
Yes. And that's exactly it. Because you're not taking responsibility to lead and identify and spot whose responsibility it is that is failing.
That's,
So which probably, go ahead, Jenny.
That's on the leader. That is on the leader to make sure that everybody is taking responsibility for their part. It's not right to put the whole thing on everyone. If there's an issue, I mean, there's okay to celebrate like when things are going well, but if there's an issue, that's on the leader.
And I agree with you, Jenny. So I think my takeaway from this was that when it comes to responsibility, collective responsibility becomes very vague and very gray. So responsibility then has to come to the level of individuals. So each individual needs to know what they are responsible for, what their boundaries are, right? And what needs to be delivered on an individual basis, so that everyone knows what they're supposed to deliver. And the leader, like you say, then also needs to take the responsibility to make sure that that is clearly communicated to each person on the team. So a blanket thing of, hey guys, we all need to do this together and everybody needs to be responsible for this, and that doesn't quite fly, right? It's kind of fudging it a little bit too much.
Doesn't work. Yeah, Nicholas, I see you're back.
Yes.
Yes. What are your thoughts so far? I'm interested to hear.
Okay, just hold on. I go. Okay. Hey, I'm not doing this well. Yeah. Okay now.
Hey.
Okay. For me, again, context is important. All right. So you have cases where just now you mentioned team. As far as I'm concerned, team, there's always a leader. And the leader has to bear all the responsibility. This is the real life. All right. You can assign specific tasks or duties to specific members and they have the responsibility. Context of personal responsibility that may not involve other people. For example, you're responsible for your own health and so on and so forth. Right. So to me, responsibility is something that is abstract, something got to do with you are taking up that duty, taking up that burden, whatever the outcome is, all right? And taking upon yourself either to plan something, to do something, or whatever. So to me, that is responsibility. Okay.
Very cool. That's very cool. And let me share with you my literal abstracted definition of responsibility, which is taking the consequences of the decisions and actions and the management of the process towards the goal. One of the major things I cannot stand is people saying that they're responsible for something when they don't take when they don't take any of the consequences. I hate it when managers or people who have not taken any consequence of anything that happens under them tell people what to do. They're not managing the process, they're not taking the consequence, but they tell people what to do. That's not leadership. Right? You have to take the bloody consequence in order for you to say that you take leadership. Right? This is why it goes back to the concept of respect. Because I can't respect a person who can't take the consequences for the decisions he makes.
So, Ethan, many organizations use this thing called the RACI, right? RACI model. So there's a distinction between responsibility and accountability. So the way I understand it is, well, the person who's responsible for it is the person who's responsible for doing the work. And the person who's accountable for it is the person who then takes on the consequences of, the outcome of that project. So how do you differentiate between responsibility and accountability? Or are they one and the same for you?
So accountability is what held against you, what's held on you by other people, and responsibility is what you take personally. So accountability is always social, right? Or with other people involved. Responsibility is just simply the taking consequences of. So that means, right? So, and I put it another way of looking at it, you are responsible for your own life whether or not you want to. You will take every consequence of every single bit of the decisions you make, whether or not other people tell you to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, to be a whatever, to not run your restaurant, to not be this, not be that. But you know what? All these comments can come all along the way. But you're responsible for your own life. That's responsibility on that most fundamental ground.
Right.
So I like RACI model. I would change the words up. I would say that, so I will go responsibility is task responsibility or individual task responsibility versus goal responsibility, where I'm looking at a bigger picture, right? And then the task, I'm accountable to one another. We're accountable to one another because we'll all take the consequences together, right? That's accountability, right? So that's where it's interesting. And then you add in another layer. But let me just talk a little bit more about responsibility as a responsibility at the same breath. Okay, so I find it very funny. People think that once I make a decision, it will lead to the outcome. Not true. All right, anybody who has been in real life and dealt with goals and tried to reach there and actually reflected upon it will realize that they are always trying to have to adjust all along the way to figure out each consequence they see, they respond to. New information I receive, I respond to. Now that's very fundamental to responsibility, right? If a person does not respond to reality, they're not taking responsibility as well. Right? So it's a very fundamental part. So like ability to respond to a situation is a part of responsibility, right? And then when we look at it, right, like usually if you actually read your consequences well, you start and new information along the way, usually you come up with a much better outcome than your first decision, which means your first decision doesn't ever matter anyway, actually, right? You just need to start somewhere. You just need to start moving. You start creating the consequences and you start figuring yourself around the way. Where most people are stuck in life is they are terrified of even taking the first responsibility of making a bloody decision. To even make a decision, to move a step forward, to be able to find new information to respond to. Does this make sense? Right? So when we go back to all of this, right, responsibility is taking that journey. It is choosing a path, taking the journey, responding to what's along the way, and taking all the consequences along the way. This is the actionable side of responsibility.
And it's interesting, right, Ethan? The last time we spoke about this, you're talking about responsibility and I can't remember what it was decision fatigue or something like
Yeah,
that.
decision fatigue, risk.
Right. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think
Great.
it's here, right? It's also in this diagram whereby you
Okay,
have making
so there's
decisions.
a very nice diagram at the end that I want to show you guys. That I'll quickly screen through a bit more because I realized that I already talked about weaponization. But because what is respect, right? Let's go back to respect first. Because decision fatigue is also due to disrespect. I realized afterwards. And this is a very long, interesting story. When you observe and acknowledge somebody's boundaries, you recognize and acknowledge transgressions and invite to initiate a conversation with the person. It means that it's always about the conversations. When respect is happening, it means always having the conversation about the person's boundaries and your boundaries. You cannot forget your boundaries are included into the respect equation. Right? So respect is all about boundaries, meaning these are the scope of my responsibilities and crossing it means a disrespect.
And I like the fact that the last statement, right, about inviting to initiate a conversation, because a lot of times when someone crosses our boundary, we may not do that, right? We might immediately respond, retaliate with defense mechanism or start attacking the person. So I like that last part about, respecting people also means that when someone crosses a boundary, that we don't immediately react with, knives, cloak and dagger and whatever it is, but to actually invite them to initiate a conversation about these boundaries and transgression.
So
I like that.
If we expect respect from other people, but we don't respect other people, can we get respect?
Yeah, it becomes really hard.
So I love what Jenny was saying, right? Because she respects and she takes care of the people, therefore they know how to respect her. It is always about the boundary setting. And so it's very interesting, right? But Asian culture versus Western culture is very interesting as well. Asian culture believes that keeping quiet is being respectful, whereas Western cultures believe that telling you honestly is a form of respect because I at least letting you know where my boundary is, right? But Jenny, you have some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about what you're saying. Yeah, being quiet will make me crazy. I need to know what's in your head so that we can figure it out together, right? Being quiet makes me crazy when people are quiet around me. As you guys know, I'm not very quiet.
And that's cool.
That's precisely why we love you here. So Ethan, when you talk about Eastern and Western cultures, the thing that came to mind was about, Eastern culture places a lot of value on this thing called saving face. So therefore, when you speak up, you can't publicly speak up against, say, someone in authority or who's your boss or leadership, right? You could speak up, but you have to speak it up very respectfully in private without anyone else listening, because it's all about the face.
Yes, and when we talk about this, I call it a mechanism of authority. So what happens is mechanism of authority is by invalidating and disrespecting other people and invalidating their opinions and thoughts by the fact that they are viewed as below the authority position. So I'm saying this as a grounds of I'm not allowed to tell you a criticism because I am a subject to you. And that is actually a very large form of invalidation and disrespect for a lot of people. So if you look at what is happening today and why people love playing politics, is everybody desires to be king, not because they're actually caring about the respect per se as a social emotional crutch, but a lot of people feel invalid unless they're king. Because in Asian cultures, you are subhuman before you're king.
That ties back to the whole thing we used to be talking about, right? The psychological development of a person as a whole, right? They need to go through certain psychological milestones, right? And because a person's mindset has tied in that, you're validated only when you're king or you're a leader or earning enough money.
You have subjects under you, you have a ton of money, you have this, right? Unless you're king. Yeah. So this is kind of a heavy topic. Let me just swing by the second section, because I don't need to do that. Here's the third section. Here's what disrespect and benevolent boundary violation looks like. So this is what we think work looks like. right? Everybody takes their shit. Everybody takes care of themselves. Everybody carries their own weight. What actually starts happening is that the person who's most responsible has everybody else showing the responsibility into their zone.
Can you see it, Jenny?
Yes, but explain it to me. So I see on the left.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody's got their little realm, their little part of their responsibility.
Yeah.
And their little boundaries. And then the middle, you're saying the person with the gray.
Yeah. It's like the nicest person. Yeah. The nicest, most responsible person in the team. And so what happens is that this person either reaches out to help everybody take on the load, or everybody goes, you know what, this person can take on all the load. Let me just throw it to them.
I don't want to be that person.
But that's probably a lot of us in this room right now, right? So I'm just saying this as an honor. I was absolutely there, right? I was carrying a mountain, right? I could feel the mountain.
Maybe that's, yeah, I really like the visual. That's me right there in the middle. Why do I do that?
And sometimes bosses do that to us as well. They go like, oh, that person is good, that person is fast, let's give that person more. And the more responsible you are, the more competent you are, the more things are given to you to do. So
and
you start.
And usually, as the person who does the most work, you still don't get the pay rise or the accolades afterwards. You know why? Because when people are used to crossing your boundaries, they're used to disrespecting you.
And a lot of times they take the credit for the work that you do.
Yes. Because they're used to disrespecting you, they start seeing you as subhuman. This was mind-blowing for me. It was something that was really, really powerful when I started recognizing that people were not. So here comes another part of this, right? There's a type of, in personality disorders in DSM, in Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, which is the psychiatry disorder, right? We have this area called cluster B. Cluster B is also where all the histrionic, the narcissistic, the antisocial, as well as the borderline personality disorder people belong to, right? So these people are experts at transgressing boundaries without you knowing. Right? They make you feel a certain way and then they just chuck all their responsibilities onto you. That's the whole role of cluster B. And cluster A, I fall kind of under cluster A and C somewhat, have a tendency to pull in all these things and think that we can carry all the load for everybody because you know what? I think I can. I'm in an imaginary world. That's me. I'll be honest. Right? So what happens is that what I realized along the way is that then they stop respecting you. What they respect is this next picture. Boundaries. So why are so many people who are at the top of companies respected even though they're complete as many swear words as we want to use? It's very simple. They are experts in creating boundaries. That's how you create respect from people, weirdly enough. What they do is they make you feel invalid by transgressing your boundaries by giving you their responsibilities and then holding their boundaries in place whenever you try to give anything back to them. So what happens is when we psychologically, naturally start cowering to these people. And that's what we actually end up doing. This is why we get disrespected at the workplace. This is why we get disrespected by our clients, because a lot of clients like to do this, right? A lot of clients just go, I paid you money, here's all the responsibility in the world. Right? Most people, when they pay money, they want to do this. But that's not what you're supposed to do.
But I think, so that's the other reality about, I mean, there are two things, right? One is that, hey, we need to make sure that we respect ourselves and then we draw the correct boundaries. And we spoke about that 2 weeks ago, right? About, what makes it difficult for us to draw boundaries and things like that. But I think also in a commercial world, you are the one who's pushing back and this is not my scope, this is not my boundary. And then someone else is there, give it to me, I'll take it all. Then what happens is, the contract goes to that person who's willing to take it out.
Absolutely.
So there is a boundary issue, but then there's also a practical aspects in a commercial world whereby if you don't do certain things, you kind of lose.
So we're in a cultural norm where boundary transgression is the norm.
Yep.
Right? So we go back to the concept of responsibility. How many people are actually taking responsibility today? Just judging by what I'm just talking about today. How many people are disrespecting other people? How many people are actually choosing to respect one another? So we are in such a culture, and it's without a doubt. I fully agree with you. We have to play the game. The question is, how do you want to play it, and how do you draw the boundaries without offending them and yet still addressing certain things? Here comes the part, right? A lot of times people don't recognize it, but okay. Halvard so the other day somebody was just sharing about Veldon value or something like this. I can't remember the name of it. But basically, just because something is priced at a luxury point, people think it's luxury, even if it's trash. Let's be frank here, right? How many of us recognize that the world and most people buy trash just because it's expensive? Right? And we go back to this, right? If you do not draw boundaries the way that this trash do, you will not be able to get those prices, sadly. Right? So the key part here is drawing of boundaries. Why people care about exclusive clubs? Why people care about all these different things? We love boundaries and breaking them. When there's a clear boundary and then suddenly we're part of the club because we paid the right money, we are suddenly responsible for being part of the boundary, and we are very respectful of it. But when we don't, okay, so it's the same thing with people who pay money. Okay, so there are people with self-respect who don't care about the price and just focus on what value they're getting. I'm pretty sure that's all of us in this room. But then the majority of people function on a level where the more money they pay, the more committed they are.
Okay, Ethan, on that note, I shall now increase the cost of my elite membership to
$300
per month. And then everybody will now rush to sign up for it.
But of course, it comes with its point. So it comes within the same sense, right? When we look at this, this is why this is such a complex topic, but it's so fun. Ironically, in design world, the more you charge, the more the client takes responsibility for their part. We have no idea why this happens, but it's true. The cheaper you charge in the design world, the more the person disrespects you and expects you to design to their preferences and expects you to be fully understanding them and whatever. If you charge as a coach $25 an hour, you will get people who will smash you all over the ground. However, for some reason, when you start charging $500 an hour, suddenly the person goes like, oh, wow, you're so brilliant. Everything you say is so wonderful. Not all clients, but it's true. There is a psychological concept behind this boundary and respect concept. The moment you have a clearer boundary, suddenly people respect you.
That is true. I think that's true. I've experienced that several times as well.
I think that's where the interesting thing lies. What is it that... So here comes the part, right? What do you want to be responsible for? Where do you want to draw your boundary? So this is where I always go back to, right? So we go back to responsibility, which is the main topic for today. Why is it so important? Responsibility is the basis for self-respect. When we talk about this is the more responsible I am as a person, the more I respect myself because I start recognizing my boundaries, right? How much responsibility can and should I take? And being responsible for my own responsibilities also means taking care of myself. Now that I know how far I can stretch, where do I want to start setting my boundaries?
And I thought when you talk about responsibility for and responsibility, I think you talked about accountability just now, right?
Yeah.
So Henry Cloud talks about responsibility for and responsibility to. And oftentimes we get that mixed up, right? We feel responsible for someone else, whereas in reality, we should actually be responsible to one another.
So I find it very interesting, right? I cannot be responsible to you or for you if I'm not responsible for myself, if I have no boundaries.
Yeah, so we are responsible for ourselves and we are responsible to other people.
Okay, it's a big question mark for me also. As in, I'm not sure Henry Clark's direct definition because I'm not in his course.
Yep.
But I'm saying this on the grounds of, okay, so I call it social responsibility. Social responsibility is a responsibility you take on to try to change a person's impression, emotion, or different things of you. So whenever we take on social responsibility, it is actually an attempt to change the impression of the person or to change the emotion of the person or all this kind of stuff. So social responsibility is when we take up for other people. Does it make sense? It is my responsibility to respect you, but it's not my responsibility to take up your responsibilities. The person's impression and ideas and emotions are completely theirs. I have no control and no ability. So I go back to what Jenny was saying, right? When people are genuinely feeling it, you have to, and Paylin as well, talking about earning it, right? It has to be given. It has to be something that's built on, done through communication, done through this, not expected. That's true respect. However, most people don't respect themselves. So again, you need boundaries in order for that to work. Thankfully, I think Jenny, because you're one of the owners of the business, so they naturally have that barrier and boundary already in place. However, a lot of people do not recognize such boundaries for themselves. And so what really creates respect is, interestingly, boundaries. So when we go back to this, right? So responsibility to another person is when I agree with you, we've already crossed some boundaries to even have an agreement, a shared agreement, because we need to open up the boundaries in order for us to share responsibilities, right? I can be responsible for my part in what we have agreed to. But beyond that, I'm not responsible for your reactions, your emotions, and everything else that's relevant to that situation. Whereas what most of us would end up doing, which is where I've been for a very long time, is if they're emotionally going to react to it, I'm trying to save them. If they are going to go through a crisis because of it, I'm going to save them. If they have a bad impression of me, I'm going to be worried. These are the things that are actually completely unnecessary in our world. I'm not responsible for your experience.
I have an example that might help.
Great.
I think it'll help. So my sister and her son were living with my parents recently. And so the grandma, right? The grandma and the grandson had a very bad argument. It was very, very bad. And he left, right? He's 17. And this was in June, and he's been living with a friend. Now next week he needs to come home to start school. And my sister called me yesterday. She was very upset because now the grandma and the grandson have to interact with each other. They haven't even spoken since then. Wow. And my sister was upset. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Has he apologized to the grandma yet? And I said, Steph, it's they own that relationship. The grandma and the grandson, they are responsible for that relationship. As the mother, you can coach him, you can help him, but it's not you're not responsible for the grandma and the grandson's relationship. But sometimes we feel that way. We feel responsible for like trying to be like the middleman. Yeah, we feel responsible, but it's not our responsibility to try to manage two different people's. Yeah, like I don't know if that helps.
And that's called triangulation, right, Ethan?
Yeah, it's triangulation where you're stuck in the middle of this whole situation and you're trying to fix. And we go back to this gaslighting as well, right? Gaslighters pull you into their boundaries and then make you feel guilty for going into their boundaries. They act like themselves in distress or gents in distress. I don't know how to describe it, sorry. Like they like to act like they're the broken ones so that you'll come in and try to save them. And then what they do is that they'll start making you feel terrible for thinking that they're weak or thinking that they're bad. So there are a lot of manipulative techniques that goes around this. So gaslighting goes back into this. You make you feel responsible by making you cross their boundaries, because the only way the reason why we cross boundaries is because we're trying to be nice and good people and responsible for other people. But then they use it against us. So this has happened to me many times in my life, right? Where somebody made a mistake in front of me, made it very obvious, want me to come and save the day. The moment I come in, they'll start making me feel guilty for doing it. I've done it so many times.
But when we're back to the responsibility, right? I felt like I needed to remind my sister that it's not her responsibility to fix this. She's recognizing the opportunity or recognizing the situation that's about to happen, right? Since they're gonna, be together again. But both the grandma and the grandson need to figure out how they're going, what their responsibility is in this.
Yep.
And if they're too stubborn, then it's going to make everyone miserable. They're not taking responsibility for their part. It's going to make everyone in the house miserable.
Right. So Jenny, whatever you said seems to tie pretty much in line with some of the notes I've taken from Henry Cloud's video. Is it okay I just share what the notes I took and then we can move around it? So give me a sec.
I realize it's been a three-way conversation quite a bit. I don't know about Paylin and Eileen, sorry.
Yeah.
Is it showing?
You started screen sharing, but it's not. It's showing yes now.
Okay, so in Henry Cloud's world, there are a couple of essential laws or boundaries. This is what he calls the law of responsibility. So he talks about how we're responsible to one another, not for one another, and this is what he means, right? We're responsible for ourselves because we're the only ones that we can control. Our emotions, our thought, responsibility, all ours, right? So when people are not taking responsibility for their own behaviors and they go out of control, if you feel responsible for them, so like Jenny, in your case, right, the mom is feeling responsible for their relationship, she's going to be very frustrated because she cannot control the grandma, she cannot control the grandson, and she needs to recognize that, she's not responsible for them and the relationship. But what she is responsible to them for is to give them the honest feedback and response, right, of how things are, so that they can take personal responsibility over their own issue, over their own relationship, which is pretty much what you said. So I think, Ethan, this is also pretty much in line with what you were talking about.
Keeping the boundaries in place, right? So I'm not transgressing into their worlds by insisting how they should solve the problem, but I can give them an open invitation to understand how to solve the problem.
Yeah. And the last two lines, Jenny, seems to be exactly what you said, right? So a parent can't make their kids do anything. You can give the consequences, the coaching, but they have to do the work. That's like gels right into what you just spoke about.
Yep. And when we look at this is really powerful. And at the same time, again, we go back to benevolent boundary violations. I just recently felt completely violated at home. Not and with all the good intentions. Eat, drink, eat, like all this nonstop for like a good 15 minutes. And I said no about 3,000 times, I think, in my head. As well as said 15 times outside, right? So, but you see, no was not respected. My no was never respected by these other people, by my own family. And this is a very interesting part. This is, and again, I'm not blaming my family, but the key part here is it is so normal for us to show this respect for other people, even when they draw a boundary, that we keep pushing against the boundary and going, please, take it. Now, we need to start recognizing our own behaviors around the area. Right? That's very scary, right? A lot of us actually do this without knowing it ourselves. I've done this too many times in my own past history, so I'm no one to judge other people for doing it. But at the same time, it's putting the collective effort to start learning how to do this properly. I think that's where the thing is. I go back to this, right? Let me just share my last page. Again, when we look at this, right? The whole story goes back to keeping your boundary yours and focusing on that first. Because I realized that most of us has spent so much time being the middle person in this previous picture doing all of this. Right? I felt this for the longest time. I still feel it sometimes, right? Because I feel like I'm taking on the weight of everybody else. But that's also because I went into their world. So it's not as if they threw it into my one willingly per se. Sometimes it's I walked straight into their zone, took the responsibility away from them, and then walked out. This is why it's really interesting, because I realized that respect is the only way, self-respect, meaning I keep my own boundaries, and other people respect, which is keeping other people's boundaries in place, and having negotiation and communication is the only way to solve all these problems. If I do not have self-respect, meaning drawing my own boundaries, I would never be able to relate well to other people and keep their boundaries in place. Yeah, sorry, my topics tend to be quite heavy.
That's good. I was just thinking of a couple of things, right? So when you talk about boundaries, imagine a situation whereby there are three people, two subordinates and one boss. So the let's call the person A and B, who have their own roles and responsibilities, right? So A writes something to the boss. That's his scope. The boss then sends it out to the people, to A and B, and then asks B for opinion, which is not his scope, right? In terms of what he's hired to do. He then gives his opinion because the boss asked. But then the person A might feel that his boundaries were crossed because now someone else is giving opinion on his scope of work. So do you see that as boundary violation since the boss has asked for the opinion?
Great question. So this is when we need to talk. Hey, wow, Melody just joined us.
Yeah.
All right, so here comes the interesting part, right? When is it an imposition and boundary violation, and when is it an opinion? Right, so we just talked about a bunch of stuff here. How many people might we have violated on Facebook right now?
No idea.
I post up things that apparently violate people and offend people on Facebook quite often. So that's because I make statements to engage people on critical thinking, and it might cross some boundaries, right? In their world. Here's the interesting part. I share it on my Facebook wall. You have the option of not looking at it, moving past it. I did not shove it in your face. I did not ask you to receive it. So in the same sense, right? Okay, so here comes the part, right? If you cannot take a different opinion, okay, so it goes back to like YouTube videos. It goes back to office spaces. It goes back to the same thing. If I do come straight to you and tell you without invitation, Alex, and I invalidate you by telling you that you're stupid because this is the thing. First up, it is a transgression because I just gave you an attribution bias. I called you stupid. I called you as a person stupid. That's complete violation of a boundary. True? Right? Second part is, did I invite you to understand my point of view, or did I try to ask you for your point of view so that I can understand you better? No, right? So what happens is that all these are considered boundary transgressions because I forced it upon you. When B gave the comment to the boss, B is entitled to his opinions. When A is angry at B, he's transgressing into B's boundaries. He's saying B should not have an opinion and should not be airing his opinion, even when the opportunity came along. And A is actually has the choice of clarifying and understanding, has the choice of appreciating and then recognizing the boundary and then doing something about it. Here comes the other part about snowflakes. Snowflakes in the current day and age get offended by every word that the university says, right? Like the snowflakes get offended if you don't you misuse a gender pronoun or things like that to that level, even if it's a genuine mistake.
Sorry, you probably need to define what you mean by snowflakes.
People who get offended by everything, right? Hey, Melody, by the way.
Isn't that strawberry generation?
No, strawberry generation. Snowflakes are defined as the people who get offended by everything, right? So snowflakes are like men have penises, right? As a concept, right? That is a factual statement. Some people can get offended by that.
Oh, I know who.
So those are considered snowflakes because those are biological realities that are related to factual behaviors. Like that's
Can I ask a
one thing.
question?
Yeah, go on.
Snowflakes is not a generation thing, right?
It's not a generation, it's a bunch of people. It's a type of person,
Okay.
right? It's a type of personality.
Right.
Yep. So they get offended by somebody airing their opinion. But we remember this, conservatives, okay, I mean, we talk about this in every single sphere, right? Every type of conservative or ultra-liberal nullifies the other side by saying that they transgress their own boundaries. When the person openly said something, so something said in public, as a statement, as a concept, as on a public forum, is open to interpretation and it's your responsibility as a human being to understand the other person. If not, choose to disengage. However, if you say that you are offended by this person's statements, that's on you. So when something comes up, if you hold the person accountable, that's different from being offended by the person. I would say, yo, dude, that was not a good thing for you to say. Can you please back it up with evidence? And can you please be accountable for what you just said there? However, the outrage that comes as an emotional reaction, as I've been completely disrespected by your open speech that I can have the freedom of not reading, becomes another layer where I transgress into your zone and limited your speech in that sense. That's what free speech actually meant, in my opinion, from what I've read from all the history. Free speech means that everybody has the ability to air their opinions and all opinions are valid. Whether is it useful, different story. I can hold you accountable. But the fact that I'm going to mute you because I disagree with you is not the way to go. I can always try to understand you and have a conversation with you. And that's my responsibility as a person. So I read a lot of things which I disagree with because I'm trying to learn to understand their point of view, because I find it my responsibility to understand, rather than scold these people and call them and call them names and all this kind of stuff. So so I go back to what you were saying, right? Is A justified in being angry? He's always justified to be angry. Everybody's valid to be angry or unhappy. For him to feel offended about this is crossing into the zone of the rights of somebody else being able to speak for himself.
There's so many things that that comes to my mind when you talk about this, right? The first of which was, the recent general elections where someone got a whole slew of internet comments. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. So personal friend of mine. Yes, go on.
He is?
Wait. No, the other person. Okay, there's two. There's the opposition side and there's the PAP side. So sorry.
Yeah, I was talking about PAP side one because he had a lot more
incumbent, right? So Jenny, just a background. There's a guy who was running for office, and he got a bunch of people who actually started saying that he was a terrible leader, he was a terrible whatever, and then so he got a lot of bad press, and that's how it happened. And then he stepped down. He resigned from the position. So yes, Alex, you can share more.
Yeah, so there's a whole slew of, some people would say attacks, some people would say it's just talking about their personal experience with the person. There was some pushback to say that this is trial by internet.
Trial by internet,
things, right? So it's very dicey when it comes to social media and boundaries and whether people shouldn't say certain things. And I think when you throw politics into the mix, it gets even messier, right?
And that's why I love it, right? That's why I love talking about it, right? I love talking about it because all these people have transgressed boundaries maximally. If they were A, not involved, B, not going to take any consequence, C, not going to be involved with the whole process. All these people who say all these things are not taking responsibility for what they say because they just want to be heard.
But that's not all of them, right? So there's this guy, and I think
of course, I was just saying, yeah.
Yeah, this is all public medium now, so I can name them, right? So there's this guy called Bryant, right? Who then offered to say, hey, look, if anyone wants to have a conversation with me over what I have just said, I'm open to have that conversation with you. And I think our then DPM, our DPM then was then saying, hey, look, I'll be happy with anyone to have a conversation. And the guy said, okay, I'm fine. Let's have a conversation. So that's what you talk about, taking responsibility and the consequence of saying certain things, right? So he was being responsible.
Putting your name and your face out there, which is why we go back to the anonymity of internet, right? A lot of people are being irresponsible and being trolls because they have no responsibility or the consequences of their behaviors. And we go back to this, right? This has been trained in a lot of us. Privileged people, including us, Chinese in Singapore, right? Don't know the pains of the people of minority in Singapore. And so if we lose some of the privileges, which is something that seems to be people are starting to feel, we feel like blaming the minorities for taking it away or the immigrants for taking it away. However, have we been taking responsibility for our privilege, for our growth, and for our... I'm saying this on all grounds of all of us, right? Have we been taking responsibility for ourselves first before we start telling other people to take responsibility for themselves or for us? And that's always my question back to people. And that's why I always go back to this, like, that's why boundaries are so important. And again, I go back to most people without self-respect. When I mean this, means people who don't know their own boundaries. That means they like to transgress into other people's boundaries all the time, or let other people transgress their boundaries all the time, will not be able to respect another person. The only way to deal with them is to draw the boundaries very clearly for them to respect you. And that's what I learned, right? So I learned it the hard way. I learned that the only way that you can gain respect out of people who regularly transgress boundaries. This includes all the con men I work with, right? I used to work with a couple of con men, learned that they were con men, then backed out and then dealt with them in a different manner. I drew very clear boundaries. But I found out that the only people that respected were the people who drew very clear boundaries with them. Suddenly they were like, okay, this person knows what he's talking about. It was very amazing. So the interesting part here is that people with responsibility in the StrengthsFinder probably find it harder to get respect out of people because we take on other people's responsibilities. And that actually hurts people respecting you, which is complete irony. Because you're the one taking care of other people, you're the one doing the work, you're the one carrying the load, you're the one worrying about things and making sure things work. But who's going to get the crap at the end of the day? You too, right? So that's also something that I learned the really hard way. If everybody was self-respecting, meaning I don't care for respect from other people, I don't care about other people, I respect myself enough to not care about what other people think of me. These are the only people who will then be able to appreciate people who reach out to help them. Because then they don't feel like they're being violated, they feel like they can have an exchange. Because they will look at, okay, how can I have a value back with you? How can I create this mutual relationship? But only if the person has the semblance of self-respect.
I think it's a combination of both. So someone with the responsibility talent team tends to always deliver on what they said they will deliver. So they then earn a reputation for themselves for delivery, for doing things well, and they're respected for that. So from a talent team point of view, there are a couple of things, right? One is whether the talent team is raw or mature. So in a raw form, a person with the responsibility talent team then is indiscriminate in taking responsibility. They take everything, right? They do not discriminate. They just go like, yeah, sure, give it all to me, take everything. So that then causes them to overload, and then they become unable to deliver because they have been overloaded. And then they feel guilty because they cannot deliver on what they said they have agreed to deliver. And the whole cycle is just a big mess. So eventually, as they start to learn, they go like, okay, look, I can't take responsibility for everything. I now choose what I want to be responsible for. And they start drawing those boundaries, right? So I can take responsibility for certain things. I can't take responsibility for certain things. And then they still deliver on whatever they've agreed to take responsibility for. So I think when we look at the spectrum of the responsibility talent team, that's how it comes together, right? And I do think that people with the responsibility talent team do become respected. It's a matter of how it shows up, how they take responsibility and things like that.
And that's exactly right. So responsibility is a beautiful thing. Everybody should be responsible. However, it's when we do not respect ourselves and draw our boundaries. So we're talking about this, right? The no factor, the ability to say no, right? And knowing when to say no is exactly it, right? So training to say no is the next biggest thing for responsibility that I recognize. So I used to be the kind of person who used to take on so much that most people would. So I've had so many people tell me they don't dare to ask me for favors because they know I'm so busy, because they see me take on so much load that they are scared of giving me more load, even when it's a paid job. So it was really interesting. So I felt like, am I not being respected? Why do they go to other people? Because I used to take on so much responsibility that I failed at. And so that was a very interesting point. I recognized my own issues because of the fact that I did not know where to say no and how to say no. And I think that's how people actually also know that you have the space to deal with them, right? Once you know how to say no, they also have the trust that you can draw your boundaries with them.
And there was a recent quote by Henry Cloud. So yes, I'm a huge fan. That he said, yes doesn't mean anything if you don't say no, or if there's no, right? So I can't remember the exact thing he said.
If there's no no lah, basically.
Yeah, but if you keep saying yes all the time, then it has no meaning unless there's a no involved somewhere.
Like the movie Yes Man. Anybody watched it? Jim Carrey. Yes Man. Yeah. Oh man, that summed it up perfectly, right? Say yes to life, and then eventually you learn how to say no, right? So that's the whole point of the movie, right? Is that you're supposed to learn how to say no.
Yeah, but it was interesting for him because he started off by saying no to everything. So he started with the other extreme.
Fixed, limited boundaries is how a lot of crappy people succeed too. So but they hate their lives, right? So then it's about how do you actually have enough yeses and enough nos, and know when to say yes and when to say no. It's all about discerning.
Yeah, and you can only develop that muscle to be discerning when you kind of cross it, and then you find that middle point for you, right? And it kind of moves along as you start to mature.
Yeah, we have to say hi, Valerie, but it's 9:30. So hi, Valerie.
Hi. I was joining via Facebook, but I realized I have a few questions. That's why I decided to join via Zoom.
Come join in. So come and ask.
I had a few questions regarding boundaries, because in Asian context, right, we tend to keep silent whenever our boundaries are crossed.
Yes.
So especially when the higher ups are the ones who are not who are transgressing our boundaries. Yes. How do we draw our boundaries in this case while respecting our Asian culture in this?
So okay, let me explain a bit more, right? So this is so what you're describing is actually an unhealthy version of our Asian culture. So when we talk about this, if you actually go back to original Confucius readings, right, you're not supposed to say yes to your leaders or your elders. You're supposed to respect them by questioning them and having conversation with them. So that's the original Confucius saying, right? You need to respect them by even having conversation with them and airing your thoughts. But so right now, today, so here comes the part, right? For every leader that we're part of, so here comes where we talk about responsibility is, do you know the consequence of disagreeing with them every time they transgress? So here comes another part, right? Watching your colleagues. I've seen a number of people who manage to say no to the bosses in the nicest way, and the bosses go, okay, never mind, they just move on to the next person, right? And the question here is, okay, so, and this is not to get someone else into trouble because you're getting into trouble either way. Somebody's getting into trouble either way. And there comes the thing, right? Can you draw your own boundary without making them feel invalid? That's the other part of the equation, right? So therefore, my next step of this is, how do you know what is okay to say no to? What is not okay to say no to? What is within the zone? What are they actually responsible for, but they're putting to you, and you can actually kind of just nudge it back to them? And there are little techniques that all come into play. It requires a lot of context for me to be able to explain to you fully, but there are always methods of doing so. I just had a talk with a lady. So there's a massage place nearby, and there's this wonderful masseuse that was telling me how she told her boss, you can fire me if you want. I'm going back to Malaysia for a week. I'm not getting a single dollar out of you during this week. Why are you trying to tell me not to go? It's as simple as that. Like, because actually most bosses are more terrified than you are. There's a reason why most bosses act the way they do. They are terrified, sleep-deprived, unhappy people who are trying to play power to try to get other people to listen to them.
They're trying to control and manipulate.
because they feel helpless, right? Most people I know in that zone are like this. And they don't know that they're deeply unhappy because they're spending all their time on cigars and everything else to try to distract themselves from it. But not necessarily cigars, but a lot of it, the stuff, right? So here comes the part. They are deeply unhappy people. Sometimes drawing boundaries with them is the way to go, or using their own method against them. Sometimes if they have told you no before, use the same method back at them and hold them to that. It's like, I know it sounds terrifying. This is why, so literally why I created The Office Matters was I'm trying to create a space where people feel safe practicing this. Practicing this on a daily, weekly level, where you get to learn how to draw boundaries in your mind with other people where there's low risk. And I love when Jenny talked about stakes, right? When stakes are high, you have to come in and save the day because the stakes are high. But when do you say no? What are the things? When do you estimate where the stakes are high or low? The only way you can do it is by practice. And that's literally how I view things. Once you have gone through enough rounds of high stakes situations, you know what is high stake and what isn't, right? After you have gone through the whole scenario, they go, actually, that was not so important after all. Actually, that was really important. Thankfully, I took it on. There are all these different things that we need to be able to experience and kind of figure out for ourselves in order for us to decide how to deal with that situation. But always use the colleagues that are able to divert work away from them as a reference point, because they are very good examples of what already works.
And I think the other thing that's important about boundaries is because they are natural limits to all of us, right? And boundaries are simply a reflection of those limits that we have. So maybe to Val's question, one of the ways that I've ever dealt with some bosses who tend to throw me everything and they want everything done yesterday is I will list down all the things that the person has asked me to do. I'll say, okay, look, you've asked me to do A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, K. You want everything. Which one do you want first, or which one would you like me to drop? And I just solely pass the ball over to that person's court, right? You can see that person went like stunned, a deer stunned by headlights, and she went like, everything's important. I was like, So she didn't know how to respond to me because there was no go. But it squarely put the question back into that person's court, saying, look, I'm happy to do it, but reality is there's only so much resources that can go around.
Giving the person, so this, I love Alex's example, and I just want to resonate on that point because I've taught a lot of different methods to different people, but that's why but the thing is that because it really depends on your boss. This works for some people, doesn't work for some.
Yep.
Right? So again, look to your colleagues, the ones who are able to divert attention away from them. How do they do it? What is happening? Why is this really important? Once you actually are able to do that, you'll start able to understand how your boss works. Once you understand how your boss works, you know how to hold him or her responsible eventually. But until you get the work off you, all the unnecessary work off you, and a lot of people like to ask you to do a bunch of stuff, and then after you finish all of it, you start realizing that they're all useless. Anybody who has done that for work? Yeah. So, like everybody's rushing to finish the work, right? And then finally we're done, it's like, oh, actually, it didn't happen. Right? So that's when you need to recognize how people be able to say no in that context with this particular boss. Use it so you can observe for yourself what is actually needed and not needed by this boss. And then start changing the way you interact according to whether you recognize this is going to be important or not. So that you know that you're not letting the team down, but you're still doing something good. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I have a question from a non-Asian point of view.
Sure.
Would it be disrespectful to ask the boss to prioritize? Like you listed, A through J. If they ask you to do, the next thing, could you say, well, how high of a priority is this?
Alex, are you still around? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Can you answer her on this? What happens?
Well, it depends on the boss. So I've done this with several bosses. Some boss is able to align and say, okay, look, what do you have on your plate? This is important. We need this first. Once you've done that, go to this other thing. So there are some bosses that's very upfront to help you prioritize. There are some that don't make sense. They will just say, everything is important, get it all done. And, so it doesn't work for some. And the only way to work with some of these people is just to not deliver on everything.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is a natural limit to what we can do and what we can't do. And so for cases like this, I think the person will start to learn that when you go to your boss and say that you can't do everything, you mean it. Yes. So the next time you go to the same person and say, look, I got so many things to do, which one do you want done first?
A lot of training in this area can be done with that in mind, right? Like, I love what Alex just shared. So I've even had bosses who tell you, I'm paying you, you better finish all of it. Then I'll be like, so one of the things is, I had the ability to do so. It's like, okay, I'm not doing anything, bye. For me, that's how I could do it, and the person panicked because I was the only person who could do it. So that's the other part, right? Like, it depends on how much weight you have, how much is actually needed. Very often, these people are more panicky than you are, right? So but I go back to this, right? But a lot of Asian bosses don't like to be questioned. If you ask them, why am I doing all of this? They get offended. I've seen that happen many times. I've seen even the behaviors of, if you ask them, okay, which one do I prioritize? It's like, they will start going like, are you questioning my authority? And it's a real situation.
Sure, Eileen, thanks. So Eileen's just saying that she needs to go. So I think the reason that happens, Ethan, is also because that boss deals the same way with his or her boss.
Yep.
Right? So if you start questioning that person and the person himself or herself doesn't actually know, but just takes orders from that person's higher up, the person then feels stuck.
Yep.
Right? So now I don't want to confront my own boss, but then now I have my subordinate questioning me and I have no means to answer you except for the fact that I've been told to do that by my boss. So now they're caught. And it's very unnerving for someone like that.
Yeah, and that's when if I were to say in Asian context, I've learned one thing very important is you start telling them, don't worry, I'm trying to help you understand what is the priority. That's why I'm asking you. And then from that conversation, it goes into like, okay, so tell me who you're trying to please. I literally asked that question.
Which is a good question, actually.
It's really true because I literally ask my clients, my other people, who are you trying to please? After you have this conversation, suddenly the person lets loose and starts going, oh, you actually know what I'm trying to do, and lets their gut down. But what happens is that they usually will put up all these beautiful fronts to stop you from entering. How come there's people entering at this time?
I have no idea.
Right. So yeah. So Jenny. So a lot of us get a lot of any questioning of authority is viewed as offensive because we are taught not to question authority. And very often, if there's pushback, it usually also because they are also not questioning the authority above them.
Yeah. And therefore it becomes very, very difficult for them to respond. Right?
Yep. Who's Ken? Which Ken is this?
I
know that you know.
Huh? Oh, hello?
James' cousin.
Okay, hey Ken. Oh, wow, I didn't know that you were here. Okay, cool. Why you come at 9:42, yeah?
I just reached home.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
We're all workaholics. We're ending already though.
Yeah, we're about to wrap up.
Oh, okay, it's okay.
but you get to hear the juicy summaries of everything we spoke about.
Yeah, I really like the part about the boss responsibility.
Right. So I think I hope like today was a fun conversation for everybody. It's kind of heavy because I'm trying to merge all these really complex concepts into simple ideas, right? Respect, I go back to the definitions of respect. Respect is all about recognizing and managing as well as acknowledging the boundaries that are in place, right? So if I respect you, if I respect myself, I maintain boundaries. Or I invite you to start interacting the boundaries and manage it in a different manner. if we talk about responsibility, is the taking of the consequences as well as the management of the process. And then we add on the concept of responsibility, right? I respond to new information as I'm moving along, right? So it means that you're always also going to be creative. You're also going to be looking at a situation and always adapting along the way. And then we also talked about I will go back to the comic because I really liked it. This one I have to thank my business partner's girlfriend because she created this within today just to be able to allow me to share with you guys today. Her name is Geraldine. She does her own comics as well. So she did this to explain how people cross boundaries and how a lot of people who take responsibility for other people end up carrying loads of everybody else. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you feel this. You feel like you're carrying the weight of the world most of the time because you have to consider for your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your uncle, your auntie, your extended family, your friends, your colleagues, your boss. The number of considerations you have in your head just to make one decision is sometimes just so tiring because you're taking the responsibility for everybody. And so we talk about this as setting your own boundaries is the step of really taking hold of your responsibilities and moving forward. And that's what we really focused on today. And then we had a conversations about how different scenarios where how do we know when is it your responsibility and when is it not, right? When is it transgression versus snowflake behavior? And then how do you deal with Asian bosses who get offended as long as you question their authority, right? And that's what we've discussed today.
So Ethan, I think there were a lot more things that we spoke about on responsibility, when we caught up, things like the emotional responsibility, when you surrendering power, when your emotions are impacted by someone else, and a whole host of different things, which we were not able to cover today.
Let's go for responsibility 2, and I can go direct into the mechanics of this, but it will require a lot of tiny little details, which is a long process. So now I can explain responsibility down to micro conversation level. Yeah. That means as we're having conversation right now, how are we taking responsibility in this conversation? How are we not taking responsibility in this conversation?
Cool. So I'm guessing in 2 weeks' time, we should have a conversation on responsibility part 2.
Yes.
What do we call that? Emotional responsibility?
So the four types of responsibility.
4 types of responsibility. Okay, cool. So for everyone who is watching the recording and everyone who is here, we are going to come back with responsibility part 2. We're going to call it the 4 types of responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And Ethan will share with us a little bit more. So shall we just go around and talk about biggest takeaway?
Let's go around and go biggest takeaway. And right now, Paylin is right at the top of my list, so I'm just gonna invite her to share her thoughts.
Ethan, thanks so much for sharing all your learnings. So it's actually something that is very thought-provoking. I've got many thoughts around, and it's actually something that I didn't realize is so complex. So thanks for that. I think it's very thought-provoking. I think one thing that you said that really struck a chord in me is really about us, starting with us, respecting ourselves and drawing that boundary and experiencing how it's like to say no and how it feels like when something is being crossed and our ability to maintain our boundary. I think only when we have a full experience of that, then we learn how to exactly really respect the other person's boundaries. So it's a little bit like self-love, right?
Yes.
So if you don't love yourself enough, you really do not know how it is like to love the other person and what it takes. So it starts always with our own personal experience, and then you translate that to imparting the experience to the other person, so to speak.
Very cool.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Jenny, what are your thoughts?
This was a lot to think about. It was good. So I think the biggest takeaway I had was and I don't remember who said it. Saying yes doesn't matter if you never say no.
That's Alex talking about Henry Cloud. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you never say no, then saying yes doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about no. right now.
That's great. That's a great thing.
It's a great start.
Nicholas, you've been here the whole session. You appeared for a while. You wanted to say something, but sorry, we didn't get to hear you. Feel free to share whatever you wanted to think about and share.
I wanted to say that whether if you go back to your boss and I think it's most important whether you respect him or not depends on how you approach him. You can say you need his help, you want to align, and if he doesn't respond, you say now based on what you're understanding, this is the least which I think. Do you have any Do you have any comments? If no, then you just do whatever you want. So I think it's a matter of trying to communicate in a win-win way. That's it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nicholas. How about your biggest takeaway from today?
Me? I don't know. This is the first time.
Any takeaways from this session today?
This is very heavy for me. I am not a language person. I am not an idea person. I'm a numbers and physical object person. So I have to struggle with it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Valerie, I know you just joined us, but you were listening for quite a bit. So if you don't mind just sharing a bit of what you learned and whether our advice was helpful for you, since you asked and hopefully we didn't transgress.
I think it helps. It helps, but I have to try to put, align them to something that I have to try to cut off things that I don't seem to fit and then just go for the main things. That's all. So I think it, but I get caught in that the context is not so clear. Moving from respect to responsibility, and then but of course this is a free for all talking. So
yeah,
we can kind of drag around. So I have to. I'm okay.
Cool.
I learned. All right, and I think I should have more of this so that I can talk like the same way as you do.
Come, Nicholas, join us.
Yeah, come join us. Yeah.
Alternate Tuesdays, right? So we plan to make this regular, and so just come join us and even invite your friends.
Yeah.
So maybe over to Valerie, right? So Val, your takeaways and was the advice useful for you and things like that?
I remember you talked about all those brands.
Yep.
Like Tiffany and Co. They create their whole marketing campaign based on prestige.
Yeah.
That to belong to this prestigious club is just like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all these universities. And I work for this company. It's a Swiss company. We are signed on with Moderna Therapeutics. If anyone knows who that company is, yes, I'm from Lonza. So basically, we deal with people sign on with us because we deliver. But the thing is, I think I don't see my clients taking responsibility, even though they're paying so much for the prestige with us. Yes, we have been really, really trampled on as well because they really say that they pay us so much money and then we must deliver. And then I really think it's a matter of how our program managers draw our boundaries as well, especially the ones who pay us the most are the ones who treat us the worst.
Oh, that's very different from some of the experiences I've heard. But yes, okay, that's a very interesting thing to learn.
Because they know that we run by campaigns. So it means that if they take up a lot, like a longer slot, right, we earn a lot more money from them. And then they will like ask more from us. Yes.
So I think this is really important, right? Like, because if everything is put clearly and the boundaries are set. So this, I think, because from what I'm hearing from you, you're not the one who's doing the deal making with the clients. Yeah. Whereas what happens is most salespeople are the panderers. So that's also a very unhealthy habit that happens, right? The panderers are the ones causing the account managers all the problems.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, right? So on my side, we had someone from the sales team moved on to the account team. So the way he described it was this, right? He said, "Oh, last time I was selling the dream. Now I'm living the nightmare." We all had a good laugh.
Yeah, so the people who are in the back end, because I'm in quality assurance, so I'm really, really in the back end, who tries to deliver the best product to the customer, is the one trying to make the dream happen at the cost of my nightmare lah.
Yeah. So,
I think there's a way to work around that. Just make them rotate every 6 months, then things will turn out well.
Absolutely. And I said, no, there's a lot of that, right? So I said, no, so everybody should be end-to-end, at least on some grounds. Right? So if you think about it, if everybody was end-to-end on some grounds and felt what's it like to live the nightmare, they will think twice, right? Or if they are part of the nightmare, right? If you make this sale, you need to part. But see, that's the other part about this. The siloing of companies have caused people to be so irresponsible of the whole supply chain. And that's a real situation, right? So the siloing, it is an office culture issue. It is a real...
Yes, let's talk about Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement. What I see is that they solve the problem of one... Oh, bye-bye. Who is...
Yeah, Jenny just left.
They solve one particular issue in one particular department, but they shift it to somewhere else, and then like, okay, yes, that's why I'm a little bit like.
So again, right? This is actually when I genuinely ask people, right? So I've seen a lot of different types of people work at different companies and even crappy companies. So my only question to people is, do you still want to participate in such a culture? And then what can you do to not participate in such a culture if you choose to leave? So here are the real things. Because when we take personal responsibility, here comes the part, right? The company cannot survive without its good staff. As long as you're good staff and you're actually trying to help people through your nightmare, you are perpetuating the same problem as everybody else is. What defines a good staff? A person who's actually trying to do what's right, but at the cost of himself and the goodness of the rest of the company eventually. So, okay. That's a good one, Ken. Okay, I see where you came from. So it's not the person with the most sales, okay? Unlike what most companies look at. The good staff is the person who takes the most amount of responsibility. Right. So actually, let's hear Ken's thoughts now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So just now, actually, I came in at the point where you guys are talking about the boss's responsibility.
Yeah.
And the first thing that actually came to my mind was my mind flowed back to my days in the government sector. So there are multiple times where I actually ask my boss, whose responsibility is this? And the next thing that I'll hear back is that, which branch are we going to blame right now? Which other branch head are we going to chop rather than us? And that's where we start to engineer the whole thing to shift this responsibility to some other people. So this is like a culture thing that actually happens a lot.
It is.
Yes.
And the cover your backside culture.
And
yeah.
That's why the crab floats to the top.
And normally when you're on the good side of the biggest boss, right, you can be sure that the responsibility, even if it's you, will not be with you.
Yeah.
You have responsibility, yes. It'll be the glorified one.
Yeah, glorified version of the responsibility. Cool. All right. So I think with that, I think it's pretty good to conclude. It was a really fun session. Oh yeah, sorry, Alex, I forgot about you. Oh my god, I'm so sorry.
Just because we are both hosting this,
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
You crossed my boundaries. Okay, so for me, I thought it was an interesting reminder about respecting other people. And I realized for myself, sometimes when I feel disrespected, I tend to act in disrespectful ways as well. So we talk about personal responsibility, right? Then I have the responsibility to continue to act in respectful ways, even if I feel disrespected by other people. So that was a good reminder for myself in taking responsibility for my own behavior and responses to other people. And that actually changes, right? Because if I start disrespecting other people, then it becomes the vicious cycle. We start disrespecting each other, and we never end up in a place where we can work better with one another. So that was a very good reminder for me.
Very cool. Responsibility is a choice. Yes, absolutely. It's a daily choice, and it's a daily growing choice. And there's a bunch of things that I can share about it. I think the next round I can share. Actually, at the rate that I'm developing around responsibility, I can talk about it for probably about a year. So I can go back to learning. I can go back to education. I can go back to moral and ethics. I can go back to sociological trends. I also can go back to marketing. I can go back to all these different things.
Let's do our next session on responsibility first, and then see what the response is.
Or duty. That's another one I can talk about as well. Okay. Duty is weaponized responsibility. It's used to make other people feel guilty rather than really focusing on what responsibility is about. I mean, it's commonly used now. Like the original meaning of the word is good, but it's been weaponized.
Interesting. Okay, so Ethan, you can wrap it up now.
All right. Thank you everybody for being here. We'll continue with 4 types of responsibilities 2 weeks from now. I really hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. It was quite heavy and quite like not context specific at some points, because I was trying to give the abstract thought so that we can bring context back into the picture. And this is kind of going to be quite similar to next week, the 2 weeks from now, but I'm going to try to add in some examples from 2 weeks from now. And I hope to see you there. And this is Ethan. I'm from The Office Matters, and this is actually from Alex's Strengths Alchemy, and we talk about strengths. But sadly, we didn't talk that much about it today. We tried to talk about responsibility in Strengths Finder, but we didn't cover too much of that. But thank you for being here. And Alex?
Yep, so thanks everyone. I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, we have quite a number of meetups and talent showcase coming up. So if you are keen, please go on to the meetup group to join us. Elite members get to join us for free because you're part of that group. And if you'd like to join us, yeah, because you're already paid. And if you, it's appropriate amount. And if you like to just join us for once and see what it's like, there's always the a la carte option. But the elite membership is always the way to go. So thanks everyone. I will see you in 2 weeks' time for our next Quick Connect Live.
See you guys.
See you everyone. Bye.
Bye.
And
cool.
I'm